Good day, everybody, and welcome to the professors here at McMurray University in beautiful Abilene, Texas.
It is pretty today.
It is. We got a little rain.
We did, and it was cooler. And you're Paul Fabrizio.
I am. I'm Paul Fabrizio, and this guy is Don Frazier.
I am.
And we're delighted to have joining us today Dr. Keith Waddle. And Dr. Waddle is a reference librarian at McMurray University. But you're not here just because you're a reference librarian.
I hope not.
He's not going to tell us how to look things up.
No, I'd say that would be an interesting podcast. Here's how we do interlibrary loans. Huh. That's great.
That's exciting. But
critical if you need it, but I'm just saying.
And that is part of what a university does.
Yeah, absolutely.
Librarians are vital to the operation of a university.
Most people have no idea what a university does, and the people that inhabit a university. We're kind of an interesting hive. In this hive, we're all alive.
He wrote that sometime. And by the way, over there in the far corner is Scott the engineer, and Scott's going to be making some comments because he's really interested in music, and Keith Waddle is a music historian.
An amateur one, yes.
An amateur one. And what's fascinating is we have an earlier podcast with another librarian at McMurray University who is a Texas music historian.
Yes, I was listening to that. That was very interesting because I have little bits in my own blog that are tributes to Texas rock and roll and old-time Texas music. So that was interesting to hear Joe Speck talk about that sort of stuff.
So what's the connection between being a librarian at McMurray University and music history? Is there something in the water? Is it the seat you sit in? Is it a requirement for the job? I mean,
it got its genesis from the faculty, not the faculty, the staff retreat we had a few years ago. And one of the themes of that retreat was to do something fun on your job. So I thought, hey, what the hell? So I like rock and roll music. It's a librarianish sort of thing to do.
You're very rock and roll, man.
So let's do something fun that's librarianish and useful to people out there in internet land. And so that's what got me started on it.
That's a great story. So give us I want the pedigree here. I mean,
yes,
he's an interesting guy beyond this.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Academically, or what do you want to know?
Whatever you'd like to share.
Oh,
we're all ears, even though they're covered up by these headphones.
Well, I have an undergraduate degree from a certain Baptist school up on Ambler. I won't name that.
Really? I had no idea.
I make no claims toward it anymore.
But, and what was your degree in?
In English, and I minored in history.
See, there's that connection. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, it's all about history. It's like having the master keys to the universe.
That's right. I've always had an interest in
the strongest
history.
Major on earth.
Yes.
I call it the most dangerous major on earth.
Yeah, it is pretty dangerous.
Yeah, knowledge is a dangerous thing. So after you got a bachelor's degree.
Then I went to Texas A&M and got a master's in English. And
so you left the history behind at that point.
Yeah, kind of. Then I became interested in the field of rhetoric and literary theory studies and went off to Penn State.
In the Happy Valley.
In Happy Valley. I figured after 7 or 8 years of Texas higher education, that was enough. So I decided to go up to the great Northeast and experience what winter was really like.
And here you are now.
Back in Texas.
That's right. One of my professors at Texas A&M told me that when I told him I was going to get my PhD at Penn State, he said, good, get it out of your system while you're still young, and then come back to Texas. And so that's what I did.
Are you a native Texan?
Yes, I am. But I went to high school in Seattle, and so I've been around.
I've been around.
I've been around, yeah.
Isn't that a rock and roll song?
Yeah, it's been around.
So you left Seattle to come back to college in Texas, though?
Yes, I was in Seattle, came back to Texas, and
what part of Texas were you born?
I'm a native born in Greenville, Texas.
Oh, really? East of Dallas.
Yeah, and there are things that are famous about Greenville, I really don't want to talk about.
Yeah, different podcast.
Yeah,
different academic field.
Isn't that Audie
well,
Murphy's museum?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Audie
just
Murphy.
there.
He's from up there.
Yeah.
Man, you did a lot of history on your way back from.
I did. I had to get it out of the
Virginia.
system. So
Yeah. Yeah. So
now, since we're going to talk about music, were you a musician, or did you just play like the clarinet or something?
no,
I'm sorry, that's an insult to people who play
I-
clarinet. I apologize.
no, I played piano when I was in. I started, sight reading piano when I was a small child. I mean, I was not quite a prodigy, but I was, close to it. And then when I was in high school, I was getting good enough that I needed to decide whether I really wanted to pursue music at that next level. And I decided no.
Do not.
Okay. So you didn't play in a garage band or anything like that?
No, nothing like that.
Do you
But,
still play piano?
I do play piano. I attend First Baptist Church, and First Baptist Church has a little congregation called their City Light thing.
Oh, yeah.
And they have a 9 o'clock Sunday morning service. And I pick the music and the hymns, and I play the hymns for our little group. And
Wow.
so, yes, I still keep my fingers in.
Literally.
Perform, yes.
Do
Yes,
you,
I-
So
do you
you're
have
one of
any?
those guys that can just you hear a tune and you can sit down over there and play it.
Sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You
If
guys
it-
make
as long
me
as it's-
sick.
As long as it's 3 chords, I'm good to go.
I
So.
wish I could do that. Yeah,
I wish I
Very-
had talent.
that's a very unique talent. That's God given, 100%. Yes.
Well, go ahead.
Did you have any connection with rock and roll specifically, since your blog is really about the history of rock and roll?
Right. Not growing up. I grew up in Texas with the most white Southern Baptist parents imaginable. And so rock and roll just wasn't part of our
I
thing.
was going to say it doesn't seem to fit.
No,
More
we
so
didn't.
are
old
you
rugged cross than anything else.
So are you
Right.
rebelling by this? Is this some
Oh, he's a
adolescent rebellion?
notorious rebel.
Uh, well, when I went off to high school in Seattle, I had this youth
Seattle.
pastor
Okay.
who introduced our group to Jesus music. So
Okay.
that was really my first intro into rock and roll was that. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Your audio happens to go in and out.
Oh,
when you do
okay.
that,
I'm sorry.
He was rocking his chair for
Yeah,
those who are
well,
listening.
sorry.
And he's tapping the,
Yeah,
the
because he's
table.
going through
and-
the rhythms in his
Yeah.
head.
Yeah,
I know how
right.
this works.
Right. Yeah, so that was really my first intro to rock and roll, was to my
Through
Jesus music. Yeah.
That's usually the other, sort of
So
gateway. Huh.
and then years later, I became really more interested in listening to it. What really started it was my wife and I. We go vacation to New Mexico every summer, and I don't know if you've driven between Abilene and Santa Fe, and that's a long,
Mhm.
long
That is a long
stretch
drive,
of
you bet.
stretch of absolutely nothing. So my son has this little music box that he bought, where you can stick a flash drive into it and have loaded with music on it. And I thought, oh, this would be a great way to eat up the miles, is just load up old rock and roll songs on this flash drive. So that's what started the whole project. And
Oh, wow.
And then as that music on that flash drive began to grow and grow, I thought I should share this with the rest of the world. And this became the beginning point of my blog.
That's a very librarian thing to do.
It is.
I'm going to catalog and organize stuff. And now that I've cataloged and organized it, I'll share it.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Yeah.
And why don't you tell us, we're going to have to take a break in about a minute and a half. So why don't you tell us about the blog a little bit? And then when we come back from the break, we'll get into
The blog.
the blog itself.
Okay.
So
The blog itself, I started about.
But what's it called? Let's start there.
It starts. This is why I brought my notes.
Huh.
Rock My Soul, the historical almanac of rock and roll.
Good.
And Rock My Soul, I discovered, has been overused by gazillion people on internet land. Otherwise, I would have changed the title. But now I'm stuck with it. But the title itself comes from an old gospel song by the Golden Gate Quartet. So that's where it came from, Rock
And
My Soul.
So if somebody wanted to find it, could they just Google Rock My Soul?
They could Rock My Soul, or they could go to my blog and look up the alphabetical index of all the songs and find Rock My Soul, and there it'll be. And they can link to the YouTube video of it and listen to it.
So there's a URL that we can get to.
Yeah.
So we just Google Keith Waddle. Will that work?
Probably try Googling Keith Waddle, my Rock My Soul Historical Almanac, and
okay.
If that doesn't work, send me an email and I'll send you the link.
Yeah, he said to an audience of millions. Yeah, probably not a good idea. All right, we're going to take a break and we'll be right back with Keith Waddle.
Bear Leader Tours. Where will Bear Leader Tours take you? Everywhere. Paris, Bruges, Triad, battlefields, Pearl Harbor, Pacific beaches, New Orleans. Join the adventure. www.mcwhinney.org.
This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com.
And we're back, and this is Paul Fabrizio with Don Frazier.
I am Don Frazier.
You are, and we're the professors here at McMurray University in Abilene, Texas. And of course, Scott the engineer is over here, and our special guest today, Dr. Keith Waddle, Texas. No, not Texas.
Oh, rock and roll.
Rock and roll music
Almanac
historian.
extraordinaire.
Yeah. So we're talking about your blog, and basically what you're trying to do in this is to recreate rock and roll history. Is that a fair thing to say?
It was originally, my original title was the historical, what did I call it? It wasn't almanac. It was another word.
You see that, and I'll show it to our people.
Okay.
That way they can see what it's called.
But I changed the word to almanac because I figured it was a historical dictionary. I think that's what I originally called it. And I changed it to almanac because I figured almanac allowed for more eccentric, odd, weird, strange kinds of things rather than trying to be historical in a proper academic kind of sense. I wanted to have freedom to do odd kinds of things that, to me, an almanac allows room to do that. but at the same time, yeah, I want to be historical. I want to give a sense of roots music and where it goes. And I was chatting with somebody the other day who's telling me, oh yeah, I teach a rock and roll history class, and I go back to the 1950s. And I said, oh well, I have a blog and I go to the 1890s, so
Take that.
So there, I know who you were talking to. I suspect. Yeah, I go back to the day I became conscious. Yeah, and Keith's going all the way back to the beginning of time. Why do you stop at 1974?
because I needed a place to stop. And
What happened
So
in
it was-
1974 that you
Is
chose
that the day the
music?
music died? No, that's something.
No,
else.
that-
Um, well, from a music standpoint, is you could say that's really when it was before hip hop, rap,
Disco?
disco.
Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, disco hadn't really quite picked up yet, so it was kind of that. And before the big giant concerts of started off. So before then, rock and roll really was still kind of a small venue.
It was intimate.
Yeah, intimate kind of thing. And it went, that's kind of up to 1974-ish. Then after that, you had other kinds of trends. When I'm finished with this, I will probably go back and pick it up again and go up to 1980, but I needed a place to
You just needed a place to stop. How
stop.
many
The
entries-
election of Ronald Reagan and music is dead.
how many entries do you have in your blog so far?
Let's see. Let me.
The sack of papers over here.
No, my last one I did as of last Friday. Every Friday I post 5 new blogs.
Wow.
So,
So you're doing one a day, and you've been doing this for several years.
well, I put 5 each on the blog itself, and then I post them on Facebook and Twitter. So if you want to get onto my Twitter and Facebook account, you can.
I followed you
You can
through
get-
Facebook on this thing, so
Yeah, so I post one per day, but I publish 5 short little blogs each Friday afternoon.
so how many do you have so far?
So as of last Friday, I have 735, ending with Elvis Presley's "Viva Las Vegas" in 1964.
Wow.
A high point in rock and roll history. Right?
So I have about, according to last count, I'm close to having 1,800. So I have about 1,100 more blogs to go.
Wow, that's ambitious.
So that'll take me a few more years to get
and
through that.
just tell us, just for the heck of it, what's the most recent one you've done?
Most recent blog
The most recent one you published.
published. I think this morning I put out Roy Orbison's "Pretty Woman."
That's a pretty good.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the first one you did?
the very
Let's go
first
back in time.
Mamie Smith's "Crazy Blues" that came out in 1920.
Oh, wow.
That was the very first one. Now, since I started doing that, I encounter people like Joe Specht, who you had earlier, who would tell me about, oh, well, have you read this book, or have you looked at that book? And so on occasion, I've had to go backtrack and find other things, and so I go chronologically, but there have been a few times I've stopped and have gone back and put in some of these older songs. So
Now,
And I'll play Joe for just a minute. Roy Orbison still does tie to Texas, so there you go. There's another rock and roll tie to
Yeah,
Texas.
another
That
tie to
song
Texas.
was about his wife.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you do this, you don't just have like a description of it. You try to get videos, YouTube videos. You try to get the music there. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a real
He's a
archive.
collector, yeah.
This is a real
yeah,
archive.
it's an arc. I'm amazed at how much stuff is on YouTube. That's what was.
No, there's
That is what's
including this podcast.
incredible. Because I've found some
Yeah.
just really obscure people who I hope will become a little bit better known. And I'm amazed that they are out there in YouTube land. So my little blogs, I don't really write blogs. What I do is I research something I hope that is interesting about the performer or the song, or some anecdote related to something related to the song, either in an article, journal article, newspaper, the London Times obituaries. They are great sources for rock and roll history. So,
Wow.
so I
Who would've
rely
People
thought?
just dying to get in there, as it turns out. Yeah.
So I try to find something that's interesting. So it's not a history of music. You're not going to read about that, but you'll find something, I hope, interesting about some song, where it originated. And so I will quote a big chunk of that and post it, and then provide a link to the song. So that's what.
So
it
you're getting
is.
more texture on the piece.
Right, exactly.
So
you
what
can-
kind of texture do you have with Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman? My first encounter of it, of course, was the movie.
Right. He wrote it about his wife.
Smart man.
His wife Claudette, that he was deeply in love with, even though he divorced her soon after. But
Well, you
that
can love
was-
somebody and not
yeah,
stand
that's
them.
right. So that was a kind of a tribute to his wife, and then a few years after that, I think she died. He had a really tragic life after that. But that's who it was for. It was not for a prostitute in Los
Richard
Angeles.
Gere.
yeah, that was not.
So
what
where
he-
was Claudette from?
Probably from Texas. I really
Did
don't
you know,
know,
Scott?
but they I know they're both from West Texas. So.
She
Roy
and
Orbison's
it
from West
don't
Texas?
and I'm quoting this from pure memory. I think Claudette was from Wink,
From Wink.
from Wink, Texas, and then
Texas.
she ended up being in Burkle for a little while. My mother, somehow she's related third cousin something to my mom. So my mom actually knew Claudette and Roy. They hung out with Little D Don and all those people that did Slim Willett Show and all that kind of stuff, which is a lot of music history there.
Scott's
Yeah.
got deep roots in this.
It sure does.
Yeah, that's more
I was-
impressive than anybody I know.
Yeah.
I always, if I need some sort of inside Abilene
Yeah.
information, I just go to Scott.
There you go. Okay, we have to take another a commercial break,
Yeah.
another break right here, and we're going to return with our guest, Dr. Keith Waddle.
When you support McWhinney History Education Group, you also support the many young workers who operate and maintain the company's digital operations. These are dedicated university students who handle many things such as filming, recording, and editing content for McWhinney, as well as cultivate the layout and structure of McWhinney's various websites, including its associated channel on YouTube. We are a nonprofit organization that exists from donations from interested persons and history enthusiasts alike. Donations enable our students to obtain a higher education, job training, and career bolstering skills. If you would like to donate, please visit us at www.mcwhinney.org and click on our About Us tab to learn more.
This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. tfhcc.com.
And we're back, and I'm Paul Fabrizio.
And I'm Don Frazier, and our guest is Keith Waddle.
And Keith, of course, is the reference librarian at McMurray University. And
But so much more.
so much more. Yeah.
I try.
Yeah. So, in your research on rock and roll, where did it begin? Where did it start? I have to tell you, in preparation for this, I read a book
Mhm.
on rock and roll
Oh, you did? Okay.
and
you
assigned
probably-
in a class on rock and roll.
You
Huh.
probably, you
And
prob-
it basically talked about going back to music, country music, and black. And I'm not even sure what the term is, but in the 1920s. And you say it goes back much further than that.
Well, the first song I have on my list is a song by the Dinwiddie Colored Quartet, which I think is famous for one of the first recordings of anything, period, in American history. And they were a black gospel quartet. So
And they were called the Dinwiddie.
the Dinwiddie Colored Quartet. Yeah, I think that's what they were called. So if you really want to go back to the roots, you go back to slave songs, back, the spirituals. That's really, I think, the beginning point of Americana music, period. So that's where you start with that.
I would buy into that. Yeah.
And where you have the Fisk University Jubilee Singers, Paul Robeson, these guys who are singing these recordings of these original old black gospel songs. That's where it really, I think, gets its roots. And then it goes off from there to blues, white country music starts coming into it, American pop music, and it all just starts to merge until you get to what I think of as 1950s teenage girls dance music.
Bobby Sock music.
And that's I think what it all converged into that. But you have these interesting books. One of the books that Joe Speck showed me was a book on what was the first rock and roll song.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
and when did they
So,
first use the term rock and roll?
Yeah, well, the term rock and roll goes back to 19. I forgot. If you look on my blog, there's the
You're gonna need a
in my-
searchable index,
Yeah.
man.
In my 1800 entries in that blog.
you'll find the phrase rock and roll being used for a long time before rock and roll as we understand it as a music term. So it's been around for quite a while.
Sounds like a ship term.
Okay. And I'm going to lose my
Yeah.
voice, so you can take over for a second as I cough.
Sounds like something that you would talk. Tuberculosis has struck him, and it sounds like something you would say as you're going off into the eastern swell. This ship's about to rock and roll.
Right. Well, I mean, it was a religious term, rock my soul. And then it took on these various sexual connotations of rock and roll.
I'm not sure I follow.
Okay. You're going to have to explain all this.
Well, this is
No,
what
don't
we
explain
need.
that part.
No, assume we're ignorant here, and so
On what part?
Well, let's just assume we're ignorant about everything. So, "Rock My Soul" is a religious song going back to.
Well, I'm not sure where that particularly came from. I'm just saying that the phrases rock and roll have been around for a while. Then it gradually kind of
Different context, though.
Yeah, in different contexts.
It changed.
But all those roots gradually kind of converged into this, teenage Bobby Sox sort
So
of
what's
stuff.
the first rock and roll song that uses the term rock and roll to describe it?
It depends on who you're arguing with.
Who would you say? I'm arguing with you,
Um,
except I'm unarmed. I have no opinion.
I mean, is it Bill Haley, "Rock Around the Clock"?
yeah, that he would be one of those early kind of guys. I mean, he's a good example of people coming from other music traditions doing dance music.
Okay.
I mean, he is a country. His original group was Bill Haley and the Western Saddle Makers or something crazy like that. And
Not the
they
Comets.
yeah,
Okay.
and they weren't making any money, but he found he could make money by doing these gigs, playing for teenagers.
Sort of like Taylor Swift is doing.
Exactly.
Right,
And
but,
so, you take these country songs, add some drums and electric guitars to it, and boom, you've got, rock and roll.
Exactly.
At
'Cause,
least from his
yeah,
standpoint.
Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, all them played Louisiana Hayride, and that's when all that genre
Okay,
started.
Louisiana
Right.
Hayride. What do
It
you
was
mean?
a radio show.
What time frame are we talking about here? I need a
this is
date.
the early. This would be like late 1940s and early 1950s.
Well, you have rhythm and
transition.
blues in the late 40s
Yeah,
who are doing songs like this. But even before then, there's a song. I thought about this. If I could contribute my own chapter to the first rock and roll song, there's the Black Quartet, who I named my blog after, the Golden Gate Quartet. They have a song called "Swing Down Chariot," which was written in the 1940s, I believe. And it begins.
That's different than Swing Low, Sweet Chariot.
Well, it begins "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot,"
Okay.
in this very kind of slow, swing low, sweet, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then about a minute into the song, boom, it just takes off.
Really?
Yeah, and suddenly, and even though they're singing a cappella, they provide their own kind of rhythm to it. And boy, that song it rocks.
And rolls.
And rocks, yeah. They just take off on it, and I would contend that is the original rock and roll song, is the Golden Gate Quartet.
Okay, then
Swing
then
Down
that leads
Chariot.
to a question.
Swing Down
What
Chariot.
is a rock and roll song? So clearly, I mean, based on what you just said, it's not something that Frank Sinatra would sing.
No, well, I mean,
in his heyday, because I mean, he had teenage girls going after him.
yeah. Well, you'd have a kind of a classic definition of early rock and roll as a blues-based song that is fast with guitars and drums that borrows from blues and country music, and that's sort of the original impetus for rock and roll. But from that, I mean, I think rock and roll is like the term. Make a little segue here. In my graduate school days, I also used to be a philosophy major. So I remember one of my philosophy professors telling me that existentialism is really an attitude more than a real discipline. And I think rock and roll is really that now. It's an attitude. It's an attitude more than a musical form anymore.
If I were to play two different songs, you could say that's rock and roll and that's not, because of the attitude of the players, musicians, or what do you mean?
Take something like you have Bill Haley, Rockin' Around the Clock. Okay, that's pretty easy. But what do you do with the Beatles' Long and Winding Road?
Mm-hmm.
Or
what do you do with some modern day country music, which is clearly rock and roll and not even country?
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
And so to me, that it has evolved into it's a kind of an attitude.
So it's got fuzzy margins.
Yeah, I think as it has fuzzy origins, and you can say it sort of became its rock and roll self in the early 50s, 60s, and then it became fuzzy as it evolved out of that. So
it when it developed, was it largely music sang by whites, or was it music sang by both blacks and whites?
Yes.
Yes, let's say
he is a true academician, isn't he? Okay.
Well, haven't you seen the musical Hairspray?
Actually, no, I haven't.
Well, it would explain it all.
Okay.
Yeah,
from a Baltimore perspective.
Yeah, I'm not really
the
sure.
The fact that I know that much about musicals
scares everybody else.
I understand. I understand.
Yeah, I remember reading something by Elvis Presley, and he was discussing rhythm and blues, and he was befuddled by what the difference between rhythm and blues and rock and roll. I mean, to him, they were the same. same kind of thing.
His
So,
early stuff was confused too, because I mean, you take "Love Me Tender," one of his first hits. That came right straight out of a cowboy movie, and it's a rock and roll song.
And it actually goes back to the Civil War.
Right,
It's.
But at the same time, I mean, what you said about Elvis Presley today, rhythm and blues, R&B would not be considered rock and roll. It's a totally separate genre. So did it evolve away from rock and roll where it started?
Well, that's what I mean. I'm not sure what that. I mean, I understand what rhythm and blues is. I mean, Motown and that, but
yeah, who says that it's not rock and roll?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, you said it with such a definitive voice. That's not rock and roll.
Right.
Well, I mean,
and you have people in rock and roll who are considered rock and roll giants, like
and we got 9 seconds left, unfortunately. So
Well,
can
we'll
you
pick
hold
it up
that thought?
after the break.
Okay.
all right.
Hold that thought. We'll return with Dr. Keith Waddle.
Okay.
Welcome to State House Press, a nonprofit publisher of quality books. State House Press and the McWhinney Foundation Press are part of the Texas A&M University Press Consortium, which handles retail distribution for several small but distinguished publishers. Our entire list of offerings, with pictures, summaries, prices, and easy online ordering, is available in our section of the consortium website. State House Press is proud of its reputation for high standards of scholarship and readability. In addition to this, we at State House Press have recruited the talents of individuals such as Phil Collins on his book, The Alamo and Beyond. We release not only texana by contemporary authors, but reprints of classic accounts of Texas life and history otherwise inaccessible to the public. Our book list also incorporates the publications of the McWhinney Foundation Press, specializing in the history of the Old South and the Civil War. We strive with our titles to make history accessible to as many readers as possible. To accomplish this task, we have recruited some of America's leading historians, as well as bright new scholars. We believe firmly in narrative history, in telling a good story, and in telling it well, without losing sight of the people who've made history and the events that changed a nation.
For questions or business inquiries, please visit the Texas Book Consortium at www.tamupress.com.
This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com.
And we're back, and I'm Paul Fabrizio.
I'm Don Frazier, and we're here with Keith Waddle. We're talking rock and roll, but we're having a hard time defining it exactly. I mean, we were talking about whether rhythm and blues is different than rock and roll, and then we started talking during the break about James Brown.
And so does James Brown
Well,
constitute
James
rock and roll?
Brown.
Keith Waddle, tell us.
James Brown, in his book we have upstairs in the McMurray Library, would say that what he does is soul music, but not rock and roll.
Ow!
Yeah, I mean, when you think
because what to him, what Elvis Presley does is rock and roll. According to James Brown, rock and roll has country roots to it. So Bill Haley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Orbison, those are rock and rollers, but not James Brown.
because there's no country.
Yeah.
So
So what are his roots?
So
Yeah.
he would disagree with you
Great
by saying
philosopher,
it's all
James
about
Brown.
attitude, because I can think of a whole bunch of different attitudes, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an attitude of youth rebelling against their parents.
So that means
And
rap
that-
is rock and roll
Yeah. So that's
because they're rebelling against the police
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
society.
so-
in terms of its origins. Yeah.
its origins. So
Yeah.
I was going to say, so we're too old now, I guess, to be rebelling against our parents.
People are rebelling against us,
Yeah, exactly.
namely our students
Right.
and our
right.
kids, I'm sure.
and our
So-
kids.
So they could be into rock and roll, but I guess we can't, or something like that. So
Yeah.
okay, you have this fantastic blog.
An extensive blog.
Yes, and tell us what makes what you do different than what books, other sources of information about this, Wikipedia.
I'm glad you asked. One of the things I've learned that's interesting about looking at other histories of rock and roll, if you were to go up onto our mezzanine level and pick up the Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll, they have a certain select group of people that they include in their
Sure.
encyclopedia. And as I mentioned earlier, my introduction to rock and roll was the Jesus music from my youth pastor.
I bet it didn't make the rock and roll.
And it doesn't make
encyclopedia.
those. That's right.
Rolling
so-
Stone doesn't believe in Jesus music.
Yeah, so you have these two very odd groups of people, and then when you learn about the origins of rock and roll, so many of these groups that developed, like these black gospel groups that turned into
Mhm.
doo-wops, they clearly didn't distinguish religion and non-religion. Some of the great early people like Sister Rosetta Tharpe, I mean, she played black gospel, but she also played in, in secular venues and things like
Mhm.
that.
Pool halls.
Yeah. So I'm mystified why there is among the Rolling Stones crowd this sort of
Oh, I'm not
dis-
mystified
dis-
at all.
distance of
You can't say Jesus. This is
Yeah.
a rock and roll
yeah
group. Yeah.
because
even-
it doesn't play with the rebellion part. If you're rebelling against your parents,
But I thought Jesus was the original rebel.
well, I agree. But
Okay.
well, I think in
Jesus is rock and roll. I'm just saying.
I think you had these early groups of people who were getting into rock and roll who thought, oh, well, let's rebel against rock and roll, and that was a way they could to do that. So
who would be an example of one of these Christian rockers, Christian rock music that you got into?
Yeah. Who are your influences?
Yeah,
well, the first
we're
person-
talking what, 1970s or so.
yeah, late 60s.
Okay.
Larry Norman, Love Song. Those are some of the early
You ever heard of it?
groups.
I've heard of
that-
Larry Norman this past week.
Those are the people I
Oh, weird.
grew up with when I was a teenager.
Can you give us the name
but-
of a couple songs that you might remember?
Let's see. Why should the devil have all the good music? That's the one.
That's a catchy tune.
Yeah.
That probably fit on a bumper
he's known
sticker.
for. But in my searching, developing stuff in my blog, I found out that there are other people long before Larry Norman, which is what makes it a fun project to do, to discover these people out of the blues. So one of the people I have
Or out of the blues.
out of the blues,
Sorry.
was a group in England called the Pilgrims. I had never heard of the Pilgrims before, and they have a song called "Heaven's the Place for Me," and they aren't great. No, they're not the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, but they existed. They were this group playing this beat type avant-garde music for the time in these little Christian coffee houses around London. And there's a whole string of those groups that existed during the 60s I had never heard of. They're certainly not going to be mentioned by any of the encyclopedias we have upstairs.
Mhm.
And so I see it as that's
Wow.
my niche in
Interesting.
history of music, as I am including these people into the history of music.
Rescuing them from their obscurity.
Obscurity, right.
So,
yeah.
so someone like
That's true
George
history there,
Harrison
man.
or John Lennon might have heard.
Probably.
Or at
Somebody
least seen
yeah,
a poster.
Yeah,
right.
the Pilgrims.
Right. And then there's another person named, a young woman named Isabel Baker, who came out with a Christian record. She's supposedly the first Christian album put out by people who don't pay attention to these things because they would know that black gospel people have been doing
Sure.
this for years. But she came out with something that is a really rockabilly type song of Christian songs about, I think her first song I have on here is, I forgot what it is.
What's her name?
Isabel Baker.
Isabel Baker.
And she has a horrible voice. Her songs are absolutely awful. But the fact that she had the gumption to put out this album
And the
to me
guts.
is just to me remarkable. And I would love to find out more about Isabel Baker, what happened to her, who she was after she came out with this album. She was about 14 or 15 years old.
And she's an
And-
American?
Yeah, she was from Minnesota, I think, and did this rockabilly Christian Jesus music stuff years before Larry Norman came along.
And there's
so-
some Abilene rock and rollers too. There's
For-
somebody buried up in the Abilene cemetery that was, oh well. Here I am. I'm introducing a topic I know nothing about. I'll withdraw the question. Your witness.
Okay, we're down to our last 40 seconds. What do you want to leave with our audience?
The whole purpose for why I did this is for people, since it is a history kind of thing, is to learn the history by listening to it.
Oh, that's cool.
Because when you pick up a book on history of rock and roll, it's just going to tell you, but you can't understand it unless you get listen to it. And that's really what I wanted it to be for. So people to learn the history by listening to it.
Okay,
Thanks,
we're out of
Keith.
time.
Class dismissed.